Hey there, my Flesh and Blood friends. Welcome back, and we have a special one today. So, Flesh and Blood's competitive play leads the charge in innovation and deck ideas. Now, a large number of TCG players across the world desire lists, deck techs, and so on, not just to copy and test, but also from which to learn. And one YouTuber during 2023 led the charge in getting those lists and the interviews along with them to the community. So, today I'm joined by none other than Alex from Tales of Rathe to chat the competitive scene and how it shapes the community from a top down approach. A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Dice Commando and a very special Go Again, a fabulous cast. So today I'm joined by Alexander Romisch, the individual behind the YouTube channel Tales of Rathe. In 2023, and especially following Worlds last year, he led the charge in deck profiles and interviews with some of the top placing players from many high-level tournaments all year long. Welcome, sir. How are we doing?
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's a blast that we can talk about this topic, and I'm really stoked to bring all the informations on.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm very interested in how you have managed to do what you do in terms of tracking these folks down. But before we get into the discussion, can you let folks know who you are, what your history is with Flesh and Blood, and how you ended up where you are with what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, my name is Alex. I'm from Germany, and I discovered Flesh and Blood around 2 to 2.5 years ago. In Germany, it was enrolled a little bit later than the US, but I was hooked right at the first sight when I saw the cards in real life at a convention in Germany. And I was also getting to know that there's a big tournament scene. So there was a calling coming up in Europe. And I was really interested in, going there, meeting other people after all the pandemic and stuff like that. To then, reunite our passions in trading card games. Because before COVID hit, I was really interested in Yu-Gi-Oh! And also going to bigger tournaments with my friends, but only doing that on the casual side. And in Yu-Gi-Oh, I was always dreaming of maybe I start a YouTube channel one day. And in Flesh and Blood, I took the leap and started a channel for Flesh and Blood.
So that's a great question. So what made you? I mean, aside from the fact that you wanted to, but what made you decide to take the plunge in Flesh and Blood, and what made you kind of dial in on what you wanted to do?
Yeah, so at first I thought it's really interesting to try out YouTube in general, and Flesh and Blood I thought was a really good starting point for that because the community was still young and I think is also still young today. So there's plenty of room to just try yourself out, meet people in a really casual way. And that is really, I think, an opportunity that was there 2 years ago. One part that we want to talk about today is like, how do you get content out? Why is certain content really interesting for the community, and especially, I think, in my view, for newer players, covering these deck lists and stuff that we will talk about.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Yeah, and I think that's a good lead in, right? So while you certainly do other things on your channel, one of the big things that I notice is that you bring those competitive recap type videos, I guess is a good way to say it, right? Deck profiles, interviews, and so on with some of Flesh and Blood's best players. So how have you been able to manage to do that so consistently? And is there anything you've learned about Flesh and Blood overall from interacting with these folks?
Oh yeah, definitely. I learned so much from just recording those interviews and recording all the deck profiles because I only play Flesh and Blood casually from time to time. It's not like I'm playing Flesh and Blood every day or every 2 days. But then when I try to like learn new heroes or learn new strategies, I always want to look for the advice from players that are actually piloting the decks at tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm always interested in, for example, one of my last deck profiles that I did was the one with Brody Spurlock, was playing Azalea and who had major success. Brody and I, we are friends, and why not cover the Azalea deck list? So not only myself can get a jump into the deck, but then also get all the competitive information out there. And I think that is something that I try to combine with those videos is like players that are just starting out, you can kind of net deck the deck list, like you can do it on February. But then you can also get some more insights on how the deck actually works and why certain cards are in there, or even why certain cards are really important for the strategy of the deck.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm confident that your angle of it is very important, right? You bringing the chat with the person because, these top level decks, they end up on Fab TCG, right? So you can go get them. There's no need for content for the deck list itself, right? It's about the above and beyond. And I think that's very important. Yeah. Right, so the vast majority of TCG players, and this is not just Fab specific, right? The vast majority of TCG players across the world will never travel to a competitive tournament. That maybe if one's in town, they'll go to it, but by and large, they're not going to spend the money or the time to travel. Yet the outcry and demand for list, right? Whenever you see somebody top something, it's like, oh, do you have a deck list posted? So and that does seem to be a bit relentless, I think is the right word, right? So even though people don't want to go travel and play competitively, they want the competitive list. So why do you think this is, and how do you interpret the disconnect between the two?
Yeah, so that is a topic that came up also in the feedback about those decklist videos, because I think it's really important to go over the cards themselves so people know or are aware of what kind of ratios are played, but then also the decision behind picking those ratios or certain cards, or even excluding some of the cards. But in general, I think net decking is for most people a starting point, right? You take the deck list and then you try to figure out how does the deck work, or maybe I want to switch certain cards to try out a different strategy than someone who piloted it is with a big success. But I think the most important part is that this like starting point, because Azalea, I think, is a really good example. One deck that I already brought up is that Brody was one of the first persons to really pilot Azalea on a big level and had the first major success with the deck after Outsiders came out and so many new cards were there. And before Azalea was an underdog, she was not really considered one of the best heroes. And so those kind of deck lists are so important when the meta shifts. I think they are not that important when the meta is kind of settled and we have the same meta or the same strategies for a longer time. I think then the deck lists are not really that interesting, like when the meta is changing. But then for sure, like not only the new players can get something out of it, right? Because people that are really having the big success with the decks can then bring up their behind the scenes of the deck, right? Because in the lab, most people try to advance in their deck lists. And even though I think Classic constructed in Flesh and Blood, you have some points that you can leverage on. The card pool is not as big as in games like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic the Gathering. But even though we have some really interesting cards that you can take into your deck and change the whole thing up, so interestingly, and that is also something that happened at the World Championship, where multiple players were having success on Fire Rising Rebellion, but some of them were having some tech cards bringing in that helped them challenge some of the matchups that were coming up in the tournament.
Yeah, so you actually mentioned a really good point about the starting point and then the iteration. Do you think that Flesh and Blood is more apt to that in terms of like the creativity of the people who play the game, or do you think it's less apt because of how complicated it is to deck build in this game?
Oh yeah, I think Flesh and Blood is for beginners. Like myself, still, it's really complicated to build the decks because there are the different pitch colors, and when you start out, you at first need to understand which pitch color are you using for which purpose, and that some decks don't even touch some of the pitch colors available to some of the cards that are really important to the deck, like in Fire Rising Rebellion, Icelander, and so on. Even in Boltyn, even though we have challenging strategies, some of the cards are not really seen in the deck lists. And so when you start out, it's really important to look at the deck list and see what kind of cards are being used widely. But then also it's challenging for players that I think are competing at the highest levels, because you can bring some cards in that change up your strategy quite rapidly, and also the meanings behind that. So I think that Flesh and Blood is complicated in the deck building, but I think it yet has not the stance like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic the Gathering, where we have so many cards to pick from. That's why we see certain cards really come in most of the deck list because there are not that many versions yet of the cards. But I think with the next set on the horizon, right, heavy hitters, the meta will change again, and it is really interesting because Flesh and Blood is such a fun game. It's so interactive, and with more and more cards being released, it will be even more fun to play.
Yeah. Yes. I'm very excited about heavy hitters. It sounds like you are as well. Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
All right. Well, how have you been able to successfully coordinate with all of these? I mean, you've done a large number of interviews, not just in person or at tournaments, but dialing in later or whatever it may be. How have you been able to coordinate and track down all of these folks? It's actually quite impressive to. I mean, I assume you're like sprinting around after the tournament trying to get in touch with people. I don't know what's in my head, but I'm just curious how you've tactically managed to do what you do.
Yeah, yeah. So my big passion in Flesh and Blood is the content creation side. So most tournaments that I go to, I view from the content creator's view. Even though I play myself, I want to enjoy the content creation process as much as possible. And the interesting part about that is for me the interaction with the players and all the people that are at the tournament. And so when I began to jump in the Flesh and Blood community and going to my first tournaments, I quickly saw that the community is really opening and welcoming. So that is something I really like about the community in Flesh and Blood, and then getting to know the people behind the cards. And that is also for me a motivation to bring out these deck profiles, is not only to then you look at the deck list, but then you look at the player behind the list. And you see like what kind of person is playing that deck. And I think that is especially important in Flesh and Blood because we are centering the deck around the hero. And you are kind of playing the hero when you are playing the game. You are the hero. And I see that a lot in the players that I meet at the tournaments and that I am making friendships with also, that certain players are driving towards certain decks. Some players really like Bravo and some players really like Fi, and there's a reason for that. In the game style, but maybe also in the lifestyle of that player and in his feelings, in everything that surrounds his person or her. There are multiple really interesting individuals in the Flesh and Blood community, and that's why I try to get in as much as possible, especially at a tournament like the Pro Tour or the World Championship, because that is a really unique opportunity that is not coming up often to get players from the US, players from Australia, players from Asia, from Europe, and from everywhere around the world that are trying to get the trophies, but then meeting them in person. And yeah, the Flesh and Blood World Championship in Barcelona was a really hefty one because, like you said, I was trying to get as many deck profiles as possible in. And a unique opportunity for me was to meet the players from Hong Kong, the Blue Pitch team. It was so amazing to talk to them in person, and multiple of the team were making it to the top cut. So they don't have a really big social media influencing yet on YouTube even. And so I thought, like, those people are so kind. They are just sitting in front of the camera. We don't know us yet that well, and we are just trying to get as much valuable information out for the players as we can. Not to like say like, hey, we are the best here, we are the best team, and nobody else can break us. But instead, being like most of the Flesh and Blood community is, welcoming and saying like, hey, we have this list, we have the strategy, and it worked like this in the tournament.
Yeah, awesome. So just going and asking, and has there been anybody who's been like, nah, man, go away over your history? You don't have to say names, I'm just curious.
Yeah, so there are definitely players who are not that open to bring out every information. And I think of players that I interact with, they are really curious in doing videos because they are also consuming them themselves, and they know how valuable it is that they can get the information from other people too. And I think that is also shown in the testing for those tournaments, because even though we have individuals and we have teams, most or really many of the pro players are testing together, and even different teams are testing together. So those informations is not only with one player or one team, but most of the information is with most of the players. And the question is just like how much time do you really have to leverage on those informations? How much testing time can you get in? And certainly one individual can't consume every possibility that is in the game. It's just not possible. And so everybody can get something out of a deck profile or a testing partner that shares some of the informations. I view it like it's when I want to research something and I want to learn something, when someone that gives his view who has much information on that topic, then I can really learn a faster way than trying out everything on my own. And I think that is something that so many players can relate to when they try out a new hero, when they try out a new strategy.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, so I've played other games in the past where, the teams specifically, they're not very shareable with said info, or because, they want to go back and put it on their Patreon or whatever their motivation, right? But I haven't seen a ton of that. I mean, I'm sure you've encountered that a couple of times, but
Yeah, I think like one example that I can bring up is that some players or teams having their own YouTube channels. And so we talked about like how can we manage to bring out content that is not the same as on their channel. I think that is something that I quite often talk about, and that is interesting for players to get to know, because whether the player is a content creator or not, I think it's valuable to like do these collaborations with content creators like we both are, because we can track we can get traffic over to the player. And if that player has a Patreon, I think it's very valuable for some individuals to try out the Patreon or even get a coaching in. And I think so many players are seeking out coaching already and trying to get a one-on-one session with a player. That is, it's just an opportunity for everybody in the end. That's just my view on it, at least.
yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. So, I mean, again, the reason I asked you on here is I think what you're doing over there is really great and serves a very, very necessary, spot in the community. So, for others who might be looking to pick up the torch, do the same thing as you, do you have any tips or tricks, any recommendations for them?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I was starting with the deck profile videos because back in Yu-Gi-Oh, I was getting so many valuable videos with people just sitting down with a player and recording it like I'm doing it now. And I think that is something I would love to see more in Flesh and Blood too. We see a lot of these online interviews or a lot of these like, oh, okay, I show my list on February or wherever, and then I explain it. But I think there's this certain magic for me when someone records a deck profile on location after the tournament happens. And some players tried it out, and I would encourage every player, even when you're not making it to the top 8, just try it out. Sit down with a friend or with a team member and record your deck profile and upload it. And maybe someone can get value out of it, because certainly I am not at every tournament. And even though it will never be like that, if you are at a tournament and you are a content creator, try to work the connections that you have already. I don't think it's a goal to connect with every player. I think certainly nobody can achieve that, maybe some of us, but you certainly have some connections, and you could leverage on that, get some information out, and it's kind of easy, right? You sit down, you just have your phone and you record it, and even if it's shitty audio, most of the players like to view these videos.
I do think there's a certain, I think the word you said, certain magic to it, I think is apt, right? I think there is a certain appeal to having the roar of the crowd in the background after the event, or the mulling of the crowd, whatever. I do think that does bring, maybe it doesn't bring anything to the video, but I think it adds maybe atmosphere to the video. Maybe that's the right term.
So, oh yeah.
All right, awesome. Well, do you have any, before we get out of here, do you have any final thoughts or anything you wanted to throw out there?
Yeah, so I want to say I really love to be part of the Flesh and Blood community. I think the interview that we are having now is a clear sign of that. We don't know each other. We haven't met us in person, but we are just connecting through the common language of playing great games, and that is like the slogan of Legend Story Studios, right? Bringing us in this community together. And I think we should foster this mindset, like being kind to each other, being welcoming to new players, and really digging to the core value of why we play this game. Even though there's big money on the line on some of these tournaments, it is definitely not about playing these games because of the money. It is because you have people that you can interact with. You have friends that you can make that have the same interests and that are maybe even having the same passions as you, playing the same deck as you, or liking the same card. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to this year that we're just starting, and with heavy hitters on the line, I'm really curious to see how the pre-release will go.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Are you headed to like Pro Tour LA or anything like that? Are you thinking about that at all? Or?
Yeah, so my my big goal this year is to attend the Pro Tour in Amsterdam, because that is really near to the place where I live. And I have met a few friends through Flesh and Blood in the Netherlands, so I want to take some time there and tournament, and also enjoy this magical time before the Pro Tour happens, because so many testing teams are coming together and they are going to their testing Airbnbs and trying to get some games on. And I really want to see how this atmosphere is there.
Yeah, no, that sounds fun. All right. Well, again, I want to thank you for coordinating to come on here, right? It's always difficult when folks are on opposite sides of the globe, right? Early morning for me, late afternoon for you. So I really appreciate you. You know, a lot of times, as you're well aware, coordinating these can be very difficult, and you're very easy. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Did you have any shout outs you want to give to anybody before we get out of here?
Yeah, so I really want to give a shout out to all the pro players that I met in the last year, and all those players that I will meet in this year. So I think it's a really banter that I think I'm not sure here. Sorry, what does banter mean again?
Oh, banter is just discussion
Yeah.
back and forth.
Yeah. So I really want to thank all this banter that we have about the game, and I'm really looking forward to all the new strategies after heavy hitters. So let's keep rocking in the Flesh and Blood.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, again, I want to thank you so much for joining. And, you know, I don't know how much you watch, but my closing line is Go Commando. So say it with me, man. Go Commando.
Go Commando, let's go.